a scale or Hanon is not technique, in my
Mhm.
opinion. It's just the exercise through which we practice a specific technique. So, for example, if I give you a D major scale, that in and by it of itself is not technique. You as the teacher have to be trained enough to know that you're working on that D major to scale, to sort of work on the wrist going up and down, or to work on the passing of the thumb or something like that. You need to have a specific technique goal. And whatever exercise you happen to choose is the vehicle through which you're working on that technique.
Whether you're a self-taught musician, have a teacher, or you're already a professional, this show is meant to help you with knowledge, mindset, craft, and strategies to improve your overall musicianship so that you can become the best musician you can be, regardless of your goals. Welcome to Musicianship Mastery. Hello and welcome to episode number 142. My name is David Lane, and it is great to be with you once again. Something we talk quite a bit about here on this podcast is the importance of technique. I've been teaching for 25 years, coming up on 26 in just a couple of months. And I'm hard pressed to remember a time I've ever said to a student, you really could practice less on your technique. But there's countless number of times that I have said, you need to be spending more time practicing your technique, and I've said that a lot here. But what is technique and how should you go about it? My guest and I are going to chat about a resource that he's helped create and a philosophy on technique that he's going to share that might give you some more exciting ideas of how to practice your technique. He is the co-author of two books, Volume 1 and Volume 2, of a series called Technique Through Repertoire. Now, let me just give you a heads up. This is for pianists. This is a piano-centered book that we're going to be talking about. And of course, the examples as we discuss them are for pianists. But this episode is absolutely for all instrumentalists. If you have ever had the slightest ambition to audition for a professional orchestra or other ensemble, you certainly know of excerpt books. They're books where you have to learn a certain piece from this famous orchestral passage that features your instrument. However, those excerpt books are simply that. They are excerpts. They tell you the name of the piece, they tell you the composer, but it doesn't tell you what kind of techniques are involved. It doesn't tell you if this focuses more on broken chords, arpeggios, chromatic scale, articulation, dynamic contrast. And in fact, that is how the books that we're discussing are organized. So if you're listening to this, what you may want to do is take your own excerpt books and analyze what kind of techniques are involved and practice not just to learn in the excerpt, but to get better at those techniques. So let's go ahead and get into this conversation. Here's my guest, Dr. Chris Madden. I'm talking today to Christopher Madden. Christopher, thank you so much for joining me today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
And I've already switched. We talked before about should I call you Christopher or Chris? So, and I
Yeah.
did. I called you the other one.
Oh, I'll respond to anything. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Yeah. So, well, I'll call you Chris from this point forward. So, um, tell us a little bit about yourself and just what it is you do day by day.
Totally. Yeah. Well, my day to day is I actually teach at UMKC Conservatory. So I live in Kansas City
Mhm.
and I'm a professor there. So I teach piano pedagogy classes and I also teach applied lessons. And then the third part of my job is that I'm director of undergraduate studies. So I guess what appealed to me about that is it's still sort of in the realm of teaching and pedagogy because I deal primarily with curricular changes and things like that for the conservatory, which is music, theater, and dance. So that's sort of my day to day. And then, as part of that job, I do all sorts of things like these podcasts or publish books or go around and do workshops and whatnot. So yeah, that's sort of what I do.
Well, I was happy to catch you It's hard to believe it was this year because
Yeah.
it feels like much longer ago, but it was back in March in Minneapolis.
Right.
You gave a talk as part of, I guess, kind of like three people talking in 1 hour. So, and I think you might have had the first or the second round of that. I don't remember
Yes.
which one it was. Um, but your talk was about the idea of learning technique through repertoire. And before we go forward, I should just kind of clarify, musicians of all types listen to this podcast, not just pianists, but as you know, I'm a pianist, and a lot of times we come from this from a piano approach. So I guess I would just say is I think everything we're going to say applies to other instruments, although other instruments I think have done this better.
Totally.
Yeah, but let's just talk about first the whole idea of what led you to this idea. And I know you have a co-author. I want to make sure that we credit her. Is it Jani
Totally.
Parsons?
Yeah, Dr. Jani Parsons, she's at University of Calgary. Yeah.
Yeah. So what led the two of you, I guess, to come up with this approach that led to two books about technique through repertoire?
Yeah, well, I think that was a great intro that you said that there are other instrumentalists besides piano that listen to this because I think it segues into the idea and where it came from, which is that other instruments do this better than pianists do.
Right.
And so, Janie was looking at that thinking, all these instrumentalists, they do excerpts to study their instrument. And part of it is to learn technique, right? There's that element, but another part of it is just pragmatic. If you're an oboist and you want to get an orchestra job, you just have to play the excerpts, right?
Yeah.
So they study them for that reason too. So it was really Janie who said, well, look at what other instruments are doing and why don't pianists do this? And that sort of was the origin of this project. And then we came across this sort of, I'm going to call it an anthology because it was like a 2 volume kind of massive
Hmm.
anthology of piano excerpts. It's all that we could find, and it was compiled and edited by somebody called Maurice Aronson back in I think the 40s.
Mm.
And what it was exactly what other instruments have. It was a collection of excerpts for piano, and it was sort of divided by right hand trills. And then there was a whole chapter on right hand trills. But the difference between what that book was and what Janie and I wanted to do was that book was super advanced repertoire. So you have right hand trills, you have the Brahms concerto, and you have the B major Chopin nocturne that just has right hand trills for pages at a time.
Hmm.
So we thought, well, I wonder if it might be more motivating and accessible for a broader range of teachers if we did something like this for intermediate students. And so that's sort of where the idea came from.
Yeah. And when I was listening to you talk about this, it's like I perked up. I knew exactly what you were talking about because from middle school through college, I also played French horn.
Ah,
And
okay.
I I know of some of the excerpts of which I couldn't play, which is kind of tells me that I'd had neither the ambition nor the aptitude to want to be a professional French hornist. But like the two Ellen Spiegel of Richard Strauss is one. There's you basically need to play all three parts of the Eroica Symphony Scherzo. There's just these things for French horn. I guess that actually could play the Renzi call from Wagner's. Like I could do
Oh,
that
okay.
one.
Yeah.
My deficiency as a French horn player, just as an aside, was I had a very good upper range and I had no low range. And like the two Ellen Spiegel, you have to have both. You have to have you have to go from high to low like fairly quickly. But
Yeah.
every instrumentalist, and you don't get these when you're a beginner. You're just kind
Mhm.
of learning your fingerings, you're learning your scales,
Sure.
you're learning your basics. But then you want to progress to become, you know, advanced enough that you could play in an orchestra, that you could play in a professional band, or something like that. And just having these excerpts are very helpful. But now, pianists, there are pianist positions in orchestras,
Hmm.
and I don't know. I've never looked into it. I don't know what their process is. If they have you prepare a piece, or if they give you sight reading, or I mean, do you know anything about that?
It's a really good question. I should follow up with you on that because I do know two people come to mind immediately. One here in Kansas City, I know who the pianist that usually plays for the symphony, and then I know in another city, really even bigger than Kansas City, that plays for that city symphony as well. And I've never asked them actually if they had to play excerpts or if they just had to sight read or what. It's a really good question. I'm not sure actually.
Yeah, I mean, it'd just be kind of funny if like I mean, it'd have to be excerpts from orchestral pieces. So it's like here's a little bit of Petrushka, you
Correct. Yeah.
know.
Totally. Totally.
So what do you think are the benefits of learning through a an excerpt book compared to, I don't know, just something like Hannon, the Virtuoso Pianist or something like that?
Totally. Yeah, yeah. It's a great question. So I always tell my pedagogy students, um, and then, the way I approach, teaching my pre-college students, which I still have, is that, a scale or Hanon is not technique, in
Hmm.
my opinion. It's just the exercise through which we practice a specific technique. So for example, if I give you a D major scale, that in and by it of itself is not technique. You as the teacher have to be trained enough to know that you're working on that D major to scale to sort of work on the wrist going up and down or to work on the passing of the thumb or something like that. You need to have a specific technique goal. And whatever exercise you happen to choose is the vehicle through which you're working on that technique. So I think that's the primary advantage is when you're working in the context of music, you already have that goal. So these books are organized by chapter. It might be Alberti bass. So you know what your technique is. They're all going to be Alberti bass. And then the advantage is not only that you know it's Alberti bass, but the teacher can sort of structure the learning of that technique in a way that is very methodical because the excerpts get harder. But within the first 2 to 3 excerpts that you teach, you're basically teaching the student how to practice Alberti bass. So it's not just that it's Alberti bass, you're teaching how to practice it and then they're able to practice it and reinforce it so that by the maybe last 3 excerpts that they're learning of Alberti bass, you don't have to walk them through every step. They've learned a concrete set of strategies to practice Alberti bass in whatever context they may see it. So I think that's the biggest advantage is that um, it's not just, checking a box for technique. I worked on scales this week. It's more specific goals for the student. And if I always think about the acronym SMART goals, and the first letter of that is S for specific. The more
Yeah.
specific we can be with our goals for pre-college students, the more likely they are to achieve them. So,
Well, let's hit the M of that, measurable.
yeah,
So, what do you think you would recommend as being the goal of these exercises? Is would in relation to tempo? Because I think a lot of times, like for example, if you're learning a scale,
mm-hmm,
I tell my students, it's like if you have to think of this as whole notes
mm-hmm,
and put the right finger on the right note consistently, I mean that's
mm-hmm.
fine. Then we'll think about dotted half notes, quarters, eighths, and
Totally.
build from there. But your excerpts, and again, I should just say I've only been working with really one student regularly so far. I'm trying to think of what we have done so far. I know
Yeah.
we've done a scales. We've
Yep. Mm-hmm.
and I'm not sure what current one we're on, but I think we're on like the third section of the book.
Sure.
So,
Sure. 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 Mm-hmm.
um, and what I've been trying to say is like not necessarily up to tempo, but maybe a little faster than we might normally with just a generic technique. So,
Yeah.
like, what would your recommendation? I got the impression from hearing you talk that these excerpts are purposefully short. I think the longest one's like maybe 8 or 9 measures,
Yeah.
and that the goal is that this is something that you can go ahead and work up to tempo. Is that how you would describe it?
That's totally the idea, because the idea is that the end result of these is to play it as though you were playing a little 8 measure repertoire piece, which means it should be up to tempo and it should be shaped and phrased beautifully, right? So, which
Right.
is also motivating, and that's I guess another benefit I didn't mention, but you're practicing these things in the context of real music, so that's kind of fun. But yeah, to answer your question about measurable goals, um, what I like to do when I use these excerpts is each week. I'll just use Alberti bass again for an example. I think when I teach Alberti bass, the most important thing that I start with for a student doing it the first time is they have to develop the ability to drop their fifth finger, usually, maybe it's a different finger, but usually their fifth finger plays the first note of the Alberti bass pattern. They have to develop the ability to drop that into the keys and release it in a rhythmic manner. So I think the first excerpt for Alberti bass is in G major, and it only goes between the one chord and the 5 6 5 chord. So there's a G or an F sharp in the bass. That's it. For a whole week, I'll say your entire goal is to do a very rhythmic drop: G up, F sharp up, G up, F sharp up, following the music. Because what's the biggest problem with Alberti bass? It's uneven or something like that, right? So it has to start from a place of the big beats. So my whole goal, which is very specific and very measurable, is for a week, I just want you to do your pinkies in a very rhythmic manner with the melody, because I think that should be doable. They usually come together, right? Um,
Right.
and then you can build on it from there. The next week, I might add the fifth, or it's always a D on top in that particular excerpt. We did that for a reason. So my
Mhm.
philosophy of Alberti bass is once you have a rhythmic drop, the rest of the notes just come with a measured lift of the wrist. So I'm going to start to add those in progressively after they're able to drop rhythmically on the beats. So if I don't know if that answers your question about it's super specific every week. It's not learn this excerpt. You have the ability to set one goal every week, which is a very measurable thing for you and the student.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And then the other thing that I was noticing is that, so each section probably should just describe us, but
Right.
you have sections for Alberti bass, alternating hands, so going from left and right, back and forth, articulation. Yeah, I know we did do that one already because I remember we uh that was one of your first sections, in the
Yeah.
book. Block chords and inversions. This actually says that twice on this one excerpt. So,
Oh, okay.
block chords and inversions, chromatic
Oh, then there's
scales.
broken chords and inversions
Broken
after that.
chords, yeah, it is.
Y-
Sorry, yeah. So
That's
block
okay. Yeah,
chords and
yeah, yeah.
inversions, broken chords and inversions, chromatic scales, finger independence, grace notes, left hand melodies, pedaling, repeated notes, scales, and waltz bass. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure. Yeah, we've done articulation of Alberti bass and scale so far. Now, it didn't. I. It, I'm not sure if this was how it was intended. It seems like
Mhm.
each section is 1 or 2 pages,
Yep.
and it seems like that the first example is the easiest, and that the last example is a little bit harder. So, would you say it is progressively more difficult as you go through each page?
Totally. So first to last, it should definitely be harder. Leveling is always a little subjective, but we tried so that each progressive one was a little bit harder. That's obviously a little subjective, but yes, they should get harder.
Nice. Yeah, just looking at some of these skills right here. I'm just going to take something like finger independence, just
Hmm.
something like that. So, like, what are the exercises you were looking for, and like what kind of challenges are you going to expect in that section?
Totally. So the finger independence section was about the ability to hold down one finger or two fingers or a set of fingers while moving other fingers. So I don't know, let's just use a simple example of a pedal tone G where you have to hold down your pinky and then you're moving your other fingers above it. That's what we mean by finger independence. So when we put that chapter together, we wanted to not just show probably the first thing that comes to mind when you think about that kind of a technical skill is Baroque music, where you have the independent voices and you have to hold some, right? But we wanted to show um, the diversity of scenarios in which you need that physical technique. So, in addition to some Baroque excerpts, we have some classical excerpts in there where the reason you're holding certain fingers is to create a finger pedaled sound.
Mhm.
Or we have, and another thing about this book is we tried to balance left hand excerpts and right hand excerpts for equal training of the hands. So for a right hand finger independence excerpt, we have a romantic excerpt where you have a melody in whole notes up in the
Mhm.
top part of your right hand, and then you have sort of a pulsing accompaniment with fingers one and two or one and three below. So what we thought was pretty cool about that is there's three different style periods: Baroque, Classical, Romantic, and both hands, right and left, where you're seeing the musical and technical value of holding certain notes and releasing others in different contexts, as opposed to your teacher in the Bach invention saying, hold that note because it's a whole note and you just have to hold it, right?
Right.
So it's a little bit more convincing of an argument for your student for why you need to learn this technique.
I just want to ask you a specific pedagogical question. Just
Yeah.
you talk about we have right hand melodies, we have left hand melodies, especially
Hmm.
especially with left hand melodies. The thing that I've always told students is, from my observation, when we hear melodic lines, we gravitate toward the what I'd call the soprano.
Yeah.
And I said the proof of that to me is years as a church music director, that if you present a new hymn and they can have the music and it can be in soprano, alto, tenor, bass, but everybody will find the soprano line in their own octave.
Yeah.
So the
Yes.
guys will be an octave lower or two octaves lower, depending on their voice range.
Yeah.
And instead of finding, like, they don't find the alto line or the tenor line unless they're trained to do that. So to me, I've always thought you don't have to try super hard with the right hand. You just have to not let the left hand drown it out. But if you're doing something like, and I don't remember this if this is one of the excerpts or not, but like the
Hmm.
Chopin B minor prelude,
Yeah.
like that is constant. Bring out the left hand more than you think and hold back the right hand. So I guess the question that I would have for you is, what are some exercises that you have recommended to develop that idea of one hand being heavier than the other at the same time?
Totally, yeah. Well, and I sort of the idea of one hand heavier than the other, usually for all of us starts with the right hand being heavier than the left hand, right? So I guess
Yes.
I'll start there since that's where most of us start.
Hmm.
Um, so I like to compare it to, honestly, I'll have a student stand up
Hmm.
and I'll have them stand on just their right foot.
Yeah.
And I might have them do it for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. And I'll say, do you feel how like all of your body weight is going down through your leg? It's going into your right foot. That's where your center of gravity is. And their left foot is just kind of dangling in the air. I have them wave it around to feel that there's really no effort going into that left foot, right? And then I might have them play the melody while they're standing on their right leg to kind of get that feeling that, hey, all of the emphasis is over here and the left arm is just kind of relaxed, right? And then I'll have them take that to the piano and sit down. And I think at first, honestly, if they're having a hard time with it, have them kind of sit more to the right side. Maybe it's not the greatest technique, but it gets them feeling that one side of their body has a little bit more gravity and the other side is a little bit more floaty. And I find that that is a really helpful kind of physical activity that gets them off the bench to experience that.
Yeah.
So the same thing can work, I think, for left-hand melodies. You just do it with the left foot, right?
Right.
Um, but other strategies I would do there are to play the left-hand melody in the right hand,
Hmm.
in the register of the melody in the left hand, and then to say, okay, now you have sort of an aural model of
Hmm.
what that would sound like using the easy hand, the right hand.
Right.
And now they have sort of an idealized goal for now play it with your left hand and see if you can match that sound ideal of the right hand. Or play the melody hands together an octave apart and make sure your tone and your shape is the same between hands. And all of this is to train the idea that your left hand, you need to have just as much control over your arm weight and the weight transfer between each finger as you would if you were playing it in the right hand.
Yeah, the challenge that I have found with this, and this is why this topic I'm personally interested, is
Hmm.
I find that very often if I ask a student to bring out the melody more,
Hmm.
they do that and they bring out the accompaniment more. Or
Yeah,
if I say, okay, if I take the other approach, don't don't bring out the accompaniment so much, then they bring the melody down. And
yeah,
there's that breaking this uniformity between the hands is so hard. It's just like why some of my beginning students really struggle with parallel motion
sure.
of in octaves, because it's the same keys, yes, but it's not the same fingers, you know.
Totally.
And
Totally.
so that's a struggle for a lot of students. So I think it's just those exercises to break the uniformity of the hands. And I've come up with the idea of, just taking taking something heavy like this water bottle and just having
Mhm.
like this hand's heavier and this one's lighter, but it's there. I mean, of course, I'm sure you know this. There's no one solution that works for every student, but
Totally. There's lots of other physical sort of activities I'll do, whether it's on just the lid of the piano or you want to get two percussion instruments or whatever. But I think what you're talking about is so true that it's two different motions, right? So that the hand that you want to, the left hand in this case, that you want the melody to come out, needs to have more of a down motion with the arm weight, and the accompaniment needs to go up. So I'll have students drop just on the lid where their left hand just drops, but their right hand does this. So
mm-hmm.
you're just kind of teaching that the left hand stops when it drops, but the right hand does a release. And that should change the sound. Or sometimes I'll get like I don't know, like a tote bag or one of those reusable grocery bags and put a couple items in it, and I'll hang it over my student's left arm, sort of
Mm,
up at their elbow or something. And I'll say, okay, now I want you to play this. And it gives them the feeling that their left hand is just weighted down a little bit. Something's literally pulling down on it with this tote bag, whereas
yeah,
their right hand is not. So anything physical like that that I think you can do to simulate that for students is helpful.
great. Maybe just one more specific section before we get into just some integration into practice. But
Sure.
just since I haven't gotten to the pedaling section,
Yeah.
what are the goals that a pianist can expect in either of these books? Because I know on one hand you might think, well, the pedal is just about the timing. But when you get into advanced music, you realize there's a lot of other things you can do, like half pedal and flutter pedal and so forth. So, what are the things that I know these for intermediate students? What do you cover?
Totally. So I think you hit the nail on the head, which is that these chapters are not just about creating that legato pedaling of a melodic line or something like that.
Right.
So they sort of explore all of the uses of the pedal,
Mhm.
whether that may be, I believe it starts with sort of pedaling on specific chords, because that's much easier to do than
Mhm.
syncopated pedaling, which is what I would call when you have to connect a melodic line because your foot is going at a different rhythm than you're
Right.
playing, right? So it'll start with sort of like more like pedal like punches to create these
Yeah.
accented effects on chords, and then it'll progress through maybe exploring different depths of pedal or changing pedal instead of with the melody with the bass line or having to change it with inner voices. So it's really exploring all aspects of how you can use the pedal. It's not just about legato pedaling.
Okay, great. All right. So, given that this is for intermediate students, what would you say are like the prerequisite exercises? Or another question is, even if we've kind of reached the point where we're ready to start this book,
Hmm.
where do you feel like traditional techniques such as your basic scales and chords and inversions, and where does that fit into all this? And I guess, would you agree that you probably need to do some of that before you're
Yeah,
ready for these books?
yeah, I think it depends on which chapter you want to do. And so, an advantage of the book is if you want to just do the articulation chapter, which you've done, it sounds like,
Yeah,
that's not going to have scales and things in it, right? You
right,
could do that. That I'm thinking of that Bartok excerpt at the bottom of the first page. The left hand is literally just A and E and D and F sharp for the
right.
whole time. So,
Mm-hmm.
and the right hand is in a five-finger pattern pretty much. So, you know, I think if you want to do certain excerpts to teach that the right hand is staccato while the left hand is slurring, you can do that, I would say, as soon as they're maybe at the end of a level one or two method book and they're able to read fifths and thirds and things like that because they
Yeah,
don't need to know about thumb crossing. That's all about two note slurs versus staccato. Now, for
right.
other chapters with scales and things like that, sure, that would be I actually always start with the articulation chapter
Yeah,
because I think it's probably the easiest one and that you're talking primarily about matters of the wrist. Two note slurs are down up or staccatos you're going to play up off the key. When you start getting into chapters like scales, I think now sometimes I use the term like compound techniques. Okay, well, a scale isn't just one technique. It's not just about crossing your thumb. That's true, But playing a good scale also has a lot to do with how you move your wrist throughout it. So that
Hmm.
becomes a compound thing. So that's
Yeah.
why I kind of think let's start with articulations and talk about these matters of the wrist and then scales because the wrist will be better. And now you can just add one new technique of a thumb crossing. So, yeah, in terms of prerequisite knowledge, I think it depends which chapter you want to use. Some probably require it more than others. But as soon as your students are reading up to a fifth, I would say end of a level one or level two method book, they're able to do some of these excerpts. And also, some of them can be taught by rote,
Right.
which I've done before and can be helpful because then they can just look at their hands and not have to worry about reading the music.
Right. One of the, I guess, philosophies that I've had, and I'm always looking to see, should I update this? Should I
Mhm.
change my mind about this? But I often use the Mozart K545 for an example
Hmm.
of, where you've got like tons of scales going up and down with the same pattern,
Yeah.
crossing under the three, but crossing the four over the one, coming back down. And then, but before we get to that point, there's some Clementi sonatinas and some Kuhlau sonatinas that have like these fairly extended scale sections. And the thing that I've always said was, um, I don't think you're going to be able to play these measures faster than you can do the basic scale. So it's like if you're if you're able to sit down like with a C major scale and go, do re mi fa sol la ti, do, if that's your speed,
Hmm.
well, you're gonna play the Mozart da 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 da
Yeah,
da da,
right,
da,
right,
and
right,
that's
right.
your max speed. So you
Hmm.
you have to increase the speed of one to increase the other. So I guess I'm wondering, like, how would you integrate what I guess we'll call the basics with these excerpts? Like,
Hmm.
what might a typical, suggested week of practice look like?
It's a great question. So in some ways, I actually think, you said you need experience with scale playing before you do the scale excerpts. I think it depends how you approach it. I actually think you could introduce the first scale excerpt, maybe,
Mhm.
which is in C major, which has the thumb crossings. And you might use that to introduce the concept of scales because it's got the thumb crossings, right? Um, and it's not going to have to go super fast. I can't remember the suggested metronome marking we gave for the first one, but it's not super fast. But I will say then, now you've taught the thumb crossing in the scale and perhaps, a nice wrist motion too. One thing these excerpt books don't do, though, is they
Mhm.
don't have, in my opinion, nor could they, unless you wanted to have an anthology that was 600 pages, they don't have enough repetition of these concepts. So once you maybe teach the new technique through the excerpt, now you say, okay, you've got that technique, you've got the thumb crossings. We now can play five different scales because they all use that fingering. And then you do your C, G, D, A, and E, and you can work on tempo, right? So that's one way you could do it. The alternative way would be to teach C, G, D, A, and E scales and then to do the excerpt, right?
Mhm.
But I think it just sort of depends on the student and what you think is best for them. But in some ways, I think it's kind of a nice way to introduce the technical concept and then you extrapolate it to just your regular scale patterns and you build speed and all of that.
Okay. What do you think is going to be the more effective approach to integrating these in your practice? Would it be it sounds like you're a fan of taking one at a time and doing a lot with, instead of like doing a whole section at once,
Mhm.
but picking like one and really trying to get it as well as you can.
Totally. And I think I'm really big on not just sort of like, okay, learn the next excerpt this week, but here's all I want you to be able to do with that excerpt next week. Meaning, can you play just your pinkies of the Alberti bass in a very rhythmic manner, and then we build on that. So until I'm confident that students have the sort of self regulation to know
Hmm.
what they're doing at home by themselves practicing, I am very happy to sequence it over 3 or 4 weeks and just add one thing a week. That way you're
Hmm.
building up practice strategies for them and you're
Right.
sort of monitoring their progress. And you do that for a couple excerpts on block chords. And
Yeah.
then by the third excerpt, hopefully you can say, okay, go learn that block chord excerpt and remember all of the practice strategy we used over the last 4 weeks and apply them. That's sort of how I would do that.
Well, wonderful. So these books are called Technique Through Repertoire, excerpts from standard piano literature that develop essential technical skills. And it's by Christopher Madden, our guest, and pronounce her name Jani,
Jani Parsons, yeah.
Jani Parsons.
Mhm.
And so you have two books right now. Are there any plans to develop it further?
Yeah, it's been discussed that maybe a book three would be maybe more early advanced excerpts. I would say the excerpts in book two probably end around a level five. Maybe you have around a level six or so. So there's
Yeah,
been discussion about starting early advanced, but we haven't started it yet.
right. And we were talking before we recorded about uh, the ills of social media. But that said, where can people either follow you or find out more about you?
Totally. Yeah. So I would say you can find me at UMKC's website for sure, is where you'll find my faculty page. And always feel free to email me. I'm always happy to hear from people. And people do. They'll email us about Janie and I about the books, or they'll email about an article I've done or a workshop I went and gave or something like that. So always feel free to email me. I'm on email a lot, and you'll probably hear back from me within a day or two, is what I would say. So that's probably
Wonderful.
best. And I'm also on Facebook too.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, but yeah, you can buy those books anywhere. I've seen them on Amazon, and
Totally.
I'm sure there's a lot of other places you can find them as well.
Yeah, and they're published by Piano Inspires, which is sort of the publication branch of the Francis Clark Center.
Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, I know you're very busy. Thank you so much for taking time to chat with me today.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
And that just about wraps up today's episode. If you have any feedback that you would like to offer, any questions, any comments, if you're watching on YouTube, you can, of course, comment directly on the video. If you're listening as a podcast, you can go to my website at davidlanemusic.com, and there's a contact form directly on the homepage. I would love to hear from you, and feel free at any point to share any kind of topic that you want to be discussed more, or something you don't think we've talked about at all that's related to becoming better at your craft as a musician. And I know I don't say this often enough, but thank you so much for checking out this podcast, whether or not this is your first episode or whether or not you have been here through all 142. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back with you again next week.